This is Maya Deren's Messes of the Afternoon. It is going to be silent. That's how it originally was put out into the world. And then she met Mr. Ito and added music. We start right away with what I call the feminine principle. We see this mannequin hand and flower come into the frame from above. And we begin to see this, what we assume is a female shadow based on the hair, and even the hand as she picks up this flower that she discovers. And yes, we're looking at her feet, and we get this idea of the journey, but the shadow is ever present, and we get this idea of the shadow self, the darker ideas maybe ruminating in our heads. And now we begin this ascent up the stairs, going to where? She's knocking on the door. Is it her home? Is it somebody else's home? We don't know, but we want to grab all the narrative threads we can. Okay, she has a key for this place, but she drops it. And why does she drop the key? What is the key? How do I break that open in terms of semiotics? Well, it's a sign, and it's a masculine principle. It's a phallic object that she's now going to insert into a lock, which is the feminine aspect. And right away, you want to pay attention to surface cohesion. We are now inside a home, presumably. I'm guessing this is the living room, though it looks like those are two beds. There's the fireplace. And what I think is important is you want to remember the objects we're seeing. What does the camera linger on? Okay, we're moving into this loaf of bread with a knife sticking out of it. And the knife, of course, is another masculine principle, and we see some reflection in the knife. And now we zoom over to a phone that is off the hook. So we get this idea that communication is not possible. And you start wondering, well, who was she looking for? Does she know this person? So again, grabbing narrative threads. Now we come upstairs. Clearly, it's the bedroom. So there's this idea of horizontal walking and ascending. Now, I find the record player interesting because this was originally a silent film. When music was added, the music actually stopped here, giving this idea of realism and the use of diegetic sound to add that realism. Now we're coming back down the stairs, clearly. And we're moving to a chair that is filled with flowers, like the flower we already picked up. So this chair has the feminine aspect to it. And now you want to pay attention to this very important convention. We see this extreme close-up of the eyeball. And her gaze is being mirrored by the camera. What she sees, we see. And we see that her eye closing closes the window itself. We get the idea that she's now going to sleep. So we assume she's entering the dream world. And that's made crystal clear with this next shot. And we see this character appear, something like a nun, but it also has that shape of the Grim Reaper. And we realize there's a mirror for a face, and we're back to that shadow self again. And that mirrors have always been attached to women. So there's a lot of gender information going on towards women themselves in terms of the codes, except for, of course, the knife and the key. And it seems as though she was running after this Grim Reaper type character, but for some reason cannot catch up, and doesn't fully go after this character, but instead goes back over the journey we just saw the awake world Maya Deren go through. And now we finally see Maya. We see Maya more fully in the dream world, which is totally an interesting choice. And there's no key use, she just walks in. And there's wind coming at her. And remember the wind, the wind blowing the curtain from upstairs. And we're looking around it. The telephone has been replaced by the knife, the masculine principle. And now we go into another ascend, rising up. And it is slow motion, which adds to that dreamlike quality. One of the things I should say is that Maya Deren was trained as a dancer with the Catherine Dunham Company and was very much into Caribbean culture and had an interest in voodoo. But that came later on, the interest in voodoo after this film. Now, wait, she just went up the stairs, but she's coming through the window? So again, that dream quality the entire time. She's back upstairs. What is she seeing? Are we going to get the same? Ooh, the telephone is in the bed. And the knife has appeared there too. And we have a reflection of her through this masculine principle. And seeing herself, putting the phone back of the hook. Something is pulling at her, pulling her away, and she falls back into the house, that staircase she was ascending beforehand. And there is clearly fear and dread here. What is she afraid of? What is she dreading? What is her struggle? Now we're coming back to the record player momentarily. And we're back to the living room. And the dream self is seeing the real self. And when Mr. Ito's music was added, turning off the record player by pulling the arm off did not stop the sound. For an avant-garde filmmaker, the amount of special effects she's using to create these multiple Mayas is amazing. And now we're right back to that same thing we've seen beforehand, but now the dream self is looking at, this first dream self is looking at the Grim Reaper and seeing a second dream self running after this Grim Reaper type character. So I get this idea of Freud and Thanatos and that people have a death wish. And now, interestingly, she pulls the key from her mouth. And we start thinking about that second dream character who's now entering the door. And we see what this second dream character sees. And the Grim Reaper is inside with that flower that Maya had already brought into the place. And this is another great special effect, using movement to give the idea of how hard the journey of life might be for a woman. How hard it might be to accept death, since that's what's in her view. And again, we have that feeling of fear, that looking over, not trying to be seen. And where the telephone was, and where the knife was, the flower is now placed down on the bed. And it's very clear that the Grim Reaper has a mirror. And is that mirror Maya herself? Is the Grim Reaper another aspect of Maya? Again, we're looking for narrative threads we can hold on to. Clearly, it's part of her dream world. And now we're using that really great special effect that Georges Méliès used, where you stop the camera, move, start the camera again, move, and it gets this idea that the person is jumping around. But to me, it shows horror. And now we have Maya contemplating the knife, looking at the knife, looking at the Maya who is of the real world. And then again, the dream Maya is looking outside, and for another time, we see this Grim Reaper. And we get a third dream Maya. She's running after it. She doesn't catch it. She decides to go inside. And again, we have this key coming out of the mouth. That turns to a knife. And we know, as I've said, these are phallic objects. And this Maya is walking in with the knife. And this is a great moment of special effect using mirrors. It is really astounding what Maya and Alexander Hammond were able to achieve in terms of special effects for this film, knowing that they did not have the kind of budget a Hollywood film has. So this to me is one of the interesting sequences where we have these three women in what I call sort of an invocation moment or a seance moment. Magic is happening. When I think of these three aspects, picking up the key and the key magically reappears on the table, I get the feeling of the beautiful side of witches. I think about Shakespeare's Macbeth and the three witches. It feels like they are in touch with something other than themselves, calling on something. Now the third Maya goes to pick up the key. And the other two are wondering what's going to happen. And it turns to the knife. So this third person has been chosen. And threes are very interesting. Always, even in Hollywood films and independent films, there's always three things that occur, three big moments. So that's grabbing another narrative thread. And now we have Maya, this third one, who has these mirror glasses, who is stepping across space and time, going from beach to land to valley to sidewalk even. And she's now in the room with the real Maya. And there's this idea clearly of killing the self. And you wonder why. Why does this character want to kill themselves? And out of this, she wakes up and she sees Alexander Hammond having just kissed her. His kiss is compared to the knife stabbing her. So we start thinking about maybe the relationship between man and woman. Notice how dancery that pull-up is. And everything seems back to normal, how we saw it when the live Maya, the non-dream one, walked into the home. And she double-checks to see that the knife is and the bread are there, and they are, but it's a little bit different. The knife did fall out. And you sense the facial expression a kind of deja vu. This man that she is with, who's entered her home, probably a partner, is doing the exact same things the Grim Reaper did. So we start thinking about the 1940s and the relationship, the power dynamics between man and woman. And there's a mirror where we see this man's face in. Can a woman truly see herself without a man's gaze? It brings up that kind of question. And I find this very interesting, her laying in bed, sort of out of it. And Alexander Hammond just begins intimately touching her. Does she want that touch? Does she not want that touch? Are we talking about ownership of the female body at all here? It looks like he's going to kiss her, and then that flower changes to a knife. And one of the great special effects, the knife is thrown, he's in the mirror, it breaks and falls into the ocean. So have we left the real world for the dream world or vice versa? We don't know. And it's interesting that the water, which is connected to mirror and mirror is connected to moon, is the thing that's taking this mirror away. And now we see Alexander Hammond walking into the house. And there's this flower that's been dropped. So we're trying to grab narrative threads. What could this be? Okay, there's a key left in the door, or did he have a key? We couldn't quite tell. And the living room is very different from how we saw it originally. And we realized that Maya has killed herself with mirror shards. So I've given you some ideas of how to unpack this film through using semiotic signs and narrative threads.